Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening, this is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Never trust a chained captive. That was one of the rules David Parker Ray posted on the isolated property where he and his girlfriend, Cynthia Hendy, lived near New Mexico's Elephant Butte Lake. They called their windowless trailer the Toybox. And over the years, they lured countless young women into its chamber of unspeakable pain and horror and filmed every moment. A Satanist, Ray was the center of a web of sadism, sex slavery, and murder. Authorities suspect he'd murdered more than 60 women. In October 2011, a flood of tips led to a renewed search for the remains of more possible victims. This updated edition reveals all the details along with the inside story on the controversial movie based on these unforgettable events. The book we're featuring this evening is a true crime classic. It is Slow Death by the late, great Jim Fielder, with my special guest journalist and pinnacle author, Sheila Johnson. Welcome back to the program, Sheila Johnson, and thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure to come and talk to you, and I'm especially pleased to get to talk about the update on this book. This was the first pinnacle book I ever read before my own first book was published, and I was so impressed and so just completely taken aback by what David Parker Ray had done. It made a tremendous impression on me.
Now, you say this was the first pinnacle true crime book that you had read. Was there any influence with, again, a lot of authors sort of stay away from the more horrific stories, and David Parker Ray is one of those that, not for the faint of heart at all, and one of the most horrific murderers and the most horrifying stories. Was this book any influence to you on the kinds of subject matters or the kinds of stories that you chose to cover in your own books?
Well, not so much that. It was a tremendous influence on me because of the quality of work that he did. He was just a meticulous interviewer and researcher, and I was really impressed by that. For my own books, I've had to sort of deal with what was in my own backyard more than, more national type stories. So I didn't choose things for that reason so much. Of course, I have run up on some humdingers right here in
sure.
the south end of the country. But I think the major influence that this book had on me was just seeing that he was able to tell this story in such a thorough and detailed manner, and I felt like it was a story that really needed to be told. I think there's an awful lot of people out there that don't even realize that people like David Parker Ray really exist until something blows up. And if he hadn't gotten caught, he would probably have gone on for no telling how many more victims with his torturing and murdering and things. So I just think this is a very worthwhile book for anybody to read that has an interest in true crime. If they have not read it, they absolutely need to. And if they didn't read it, or if they did read it in the past, they need to check out this update because there's just an incredible amount of things that have happened with this story since this book was written.
Right. Now, I'm very interested myself in hearing about the movie because I had no idea this controversial movie based on the story itself too. So, and just for those people that are listening too, when did Jim Fielder pass away?
I'm not sure exactly when. I believe it was probably about 2010 or 11. Because he did some investigation discovery programs in 2008 and 2009, and I didn't know that he had passed away until my editor called me and asked me if I would be interested in updating the book.
Now, tell us about that. Was that Michaela Hamilton? And tell us about that conversation, and because we already know that this is a first pinnacle that you read, and of course that it influenced you in terms of the investigative journalism that he practiced with this, the meticulous detail and covering all the bases and doing all the extensive interviews. Tell us about the conversation with Michaela Hamilton from Kensington Press and Pinnacle Imprint.
Well, she called me one day and asked if I would be interested in writing an update for this book, because I think it was first published in 2003, and she said that she knew from conversations with Mr. Fielder that quite a bit had happened. And I said, well, sure, let me get on the internet and look around a little bit and see what it is and see, about how big this update's going to be. And I was just astounded when I saw how many different developments there had been in this case. I mean, David Parker Ray died in 2002 in prison, and he was still out there, or you could consider that he was out there pulling everybody's strings just like a puppet master, because all these things kept happening to people who he had been involved with, his victims, various and sundry other people that he dealt with, and it was like he was still there and still just as sick and evil and bad as he ever was. And I immediately got back with her and said, oh, goodness, yes, I'll write the update, and I'll let you know how long it'll be as I go. And I ended up with, I think, over 60 pages just of updated material. There were so many different topics. But
incredible.
Mr.
So
Fielder
he's actually
kept up with it.
So Fielder had continued with the investigation all those years.
Mm-hmm. And he was planning on writing the update himself, and evidently he died before he could get it done. And there were some of the things that had happened that had even taken place after he died, some of the largest developments in the case. And I was just I considered it an honor to be asked to do it, because it was one of their best and biggest titles that they had ever had. It was just such an amazing book. And then to get the privilege of updating it, I was just really pleased.
Well, if you could be so kind, give our audience, for those that don't know this incredible story or don't know this incredible story well enough, give us a synopsis of the story itself, what the David Parker Ray and the accomplices, because amazingly there's accomplices in this, and then tell us about the updates. I think that's the best way, I think, to explain this, is give us the nature of the evil of David Parker Ray and his various accomplices, and then we could talk about Cynthia Vigil as well, that led to the discovery of this entire hell on earth here, and then tell us about what investigation and what was uncovered, even, like you say, even after Jim had passed away, and these latest and greatest developments from David Parker Ray.
Okay, well, Slow Death is his story, and all the other people that were sort of operating on the fringes of his just really sick and perverted group, including his daughter. Her name was Jessie Ray, and she would get out and help him lure young girls on some occasions to come to what they called the Toybox. It was this $100,000 custom-built trailer that he had fixed up, and just a total torture chamber. It had every kind of torture device you could ever imagine, hanging on the walls. It had a leather-covered bench that he would strap people down to. Well, women. He never tortured a man, as far as I was able to find out. It had whips and chains and pulleys and all kinds of straps and clamps and spreader bars and surgical blades and saws, and he had a camcorder that sat right there at the end of his exam table, as he referred to it, and he had it set up to make videos of his victims while he was torturing them, and then he had a monitor up above that table so that they would have to watch what was being done to them. And there's no describing the terrible things that he would do. And there's several instances here in the book where they transcribed these long tapes that he had made for his victims, and he would play that for them, telling them what was going to happen to them while they were strapped down there in the toy box. And another thing he had in there was like a carpet-lined casket that he would put his victims in between torture sessions and have them in there in the dark and terrified, and that, I guess, was as bad torture as anything he could have come up with. And it has been estimated by what he has said in his journals that the FBI was able to get hold of. And luckily, he kept journals because that helped him locate some other things along as they went. But he said in those journals that he had killed around 40 women. And, of course, they've never found nearly as much evidence of him doing that, but they think that it's just because he was very good at hiding bodies. And he was finally caught when this Cynthia that you mentioned, he had kept her for about 3 days chained and just with a dog collar around her neck and a long chain. And she managed to get hold of an ice pick and stab his girlfriend and get loose, and went running down the road stark naked except for a chain and a collar, and managed to get help. And if it had not been for that, he would have gone right on and wouldn't have been caught. And there was a lot of speculation that he was also using amnesia-inducing drugs that he was giving to a lot of these women, and that he had a lot more victims out there that he had drugged to the point that they didn't even realize they had been assaulted and tortured like that. So, there's always been a big call that's gone up for anybody that remembers anything to please, come to the authorities. But we'll never really know the truth about his victims because, there's nobody there to tell it now. He's dead. And
but there was videotapes. What's incredible is that right in the very beginning of the book describes. This is in the prologue to the original Slow Death. If I could, I'd like to read this because this is the horror of David Parker Ray. Smoke was pouring out from between her legs, the sacred place where God had intended for this young woman to give birth to a baby someday. 8 Federal Bureau of Investigation FBI special agents watched the homemade videotape with a growing sense of horror crossing their somber faces. Their eyes followed the 2 people torturing the faceless victims, David Parker Ray, 59, and his girlfriend, Cynthia Lee Hendy, 39. The criminals hovered over the naked woman and stuck a hot cattle prod inside her vagina, watching her body writhe in pain. The agents kept their eyes on Ray and Hendy. The federal investigators were sitting inside an 20-foot wide cargo trailer where the crime had taken place. The trailer was parked on the edge of Bass Road along the shoreline of the larger lake in New Mexico, Elephant Butte Lake. The partners in crime lived on the outskirts of a small town called Truth or Consequences. Yeah, they go on from there. That's the kind of videotapes that were created at this Toybox as well. Now, tell us a little bit about the accomplices, because there's his daughter, Jessie Ray,
daughter Jessie,
his girlfriend, and then another accomplice at some other point as well.
Yeah, we had Dennis Ray Yancy, who was an accomplice of his, who actually went to prison for strangling a woman, and they said that Ray was watching and videotaping it. So Yancy went to prison for that, and he behaved himself well enough that he got paroled in 2010, but there was no approved place for him to go. The parole board didn't have any sort of place for him to go and live on parole that they would approve of, and so he had to go back and stay in jail for a while longer. And then when they finally came up with a place that was approved to move to, he's still on probation until 2015. And he was the main, accomplice that he had that actually committed a murder that they know of. Now, it's possible that Cynthia Hendy might have also, Cynthia Hendy. And she was in prison. I have not been able to find out if she's still in prison at this time or not, but she was for quite a while for, I think, aiding and abetting his crime against Cynthia.
Oh, excuse me.
Cynthia Vigil. But there's one victim that I would like to recognize as a victim, because technically she wasn't, but at the time when the FBI was first going in to that Toybox and seeing everything that was in there and all the terrible devices he had invented, there was an FBI agent, Special Agent Patricia Rust, who her job was to go in there and sketch all these different devices of his. And evidently that really, really got to her, because not too long after she had that assignment, she committed suicide. And I've always felt like that was just another victim of his right there.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Cause that.
Yeah. It must have been, it's very, Jim captures that horror as well, that she goes home and then commits suicide just from, I guess, just any shred of any humanity left after witnessing that. So, yeah, it's a very touching part of the book. Now, you say that there was further investigation, and I'm assuming that would be about other victims and maybe the location of other bodies, or maybe not. So tell us about some of the other developments that had occurred since this case and since his imprisonment and then death shortly after.
Well, the major development in 2011, the authorities reported that they had received some what they referred to as extremely credible information about a young girl whose name was Jill Troya, and Ray had mentioned in his journal that he had taken an Oriental woman for a victim and had killed her. And this girl was Oriental, and the time frame fit, the age that she was fit, and she was a friend. She was dating his daughter, Jessie. And the last time anybody saw Jill alive, she and Jessie had a fight. And Jessie called her daddy, supposedly, to come and pick her up at the bar or club where they were in Truth or Consequences. And nobody ever saw this Jill again. She just disappeared without a trace. And that is what the tip was about that was received in 2011. And as a result, there was just an enormous search effort that went on out there at Elephant Butte Lake, and they worked on that for weeks and got all sorts of other tips and information in. They found several things out there, and then they had some other people that gave them further information. There was a man that had used to deliver loads of concrete there to the park at Elephant Butte Lake State Park where Ray worked, and he would deliver the concrete there to Ray up in an out-of-the-way area where nobody was around. He wouldn't let the guy watch what he was doing with it. He wouldn't let him get out of the truck up there. And what he was doing was putting it in some great big oversized huge truck tires that this delivery man said were plenty big enough to hide a body in. And he got to thinking after this came out about Jill Troya being missing that Ray could have been hiding bodies in those tires all that time. He told him that he was getting them done to anchor down the marina, but they never made their way down there. So if they did, they went to another section of the lake. But that was one of the pieces of information that came in. And when word were spreading about the search for Jill Troya's remains or anything else they can find, an El Paso dentist called in and told him that he had been at the lake and the water was way down at that time because of the drought, further lower than it had been for a long time. And he found some human leg bones out there, turned them in to the authorities. He found a choke chain collar that was found nearby there, and he found a blue T-shirt that had been left there for some time. And they said those bones were so weathered that they were not confident that they'd ever be able to get any DNA information from them. But I think at the last update I had on it that they were still attempting to. And they found a fake ID in Ray's house, and with a lot of other stuff that he had. He was bad to keep souvenirs, and one of the things he found was an ID of a real pretty dark-haired woman, and they just immediately panicked thinking that was a victim and put out all sorts of feelers about that, but the woman showed up and, said it wasn't her and she didn't know when she lost that ID or how he got hold of it or anything of the sort. I myself think that she probably let it get away from her, but with it being a fake, she wouldn't want to admit that that it was not one of hers. And his last victim, Cynthia, the Jill, had overheard him and Cynthia Hendy talking about other victims of his that had been given drugs and then let go. And she made a plea for people to come forward while they were conducting this search in 2011 there. She said, please, if you have any information or if you even think anything might have been done to you, please come forward and help solve these things.
Right.
And she was very, very cooperative. And to me also, one of the most interesting things, the FBI had collected all sorts of jewelry and accessories and things of that nature out of Ray's trailer after he was arrested. And they put 34 pages of pictures on the FBI's website, and they probably are still there. They had hundreds of photos of things that he had taken. They also put it on Facebook. And I would encourage anybody that might happen to be listening that had any kind of a missing person in the Southwest back at that time, please get on there and look at those items, because some of them are just very cheapest little pieces of costume jewelry, and others are very obviously one-of-a-kind handmade pieces that could not be mistaken for anything else. Right. And if you get a chance, go on there and look at those things, because it's amazing the number of things that he kept, and they were all women's items.
Right. You pronounced Cindy Vigil. How did you pronounce? Sorry.
Vigil.
Vigil. Mm-hmm. Yes. What's interesting is how the escape is described. I know you talked about it, but it was interesting is that the David Parker Ray had left, and he entrusted Cindy Henry to take care of the captive, and there was some keys that were left, and so she said that she sort of maneuvered the table over with the keys, and then Henry came back into the room and was enraged that she was trying to escape and start beating her with a lamp. So she said she was still fighting for her life, but she still was trying the keys, and finally got the key unlocked, or the lock undone, and then continued to fight, and then a box fell down, and an ice pick fell out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
So very
stabbed her with that ice pick.
Yeah, and then escaped, and then it was amazing what he captured was this woman running through the trailer park. First, tried to get into a car, but the woman was so frightened that it would not let her get in the vehicle. And then she finally made it to this double-wide trailer, and then a sympathetic woman and a man, and they listened to her pleas, and David Parker Ray and his accomplice were about a block away, driving in a vehicle looking for her. So
they were looking. If she hadn't already gotten inside by then, they would have picked her back up.
Yeah,
it's awful to think about.
Yeah, and the scores of victims that this woman, with her brave effort, saved, not only her own life but other people's lives, certainly, because there's no reason for him to stop. One thing that we haven't mentioned, and this is sort of rare in true crime, it really is, that people allude to it in some stories, but this person claimed to be a Satanist and to operate sort of a coven, or if that's the term, but with other Satanist members. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think that he was doing that not so much because he himself believed that he was a Satanist. I think he was doing that to lure people in, like this Dennis Roy Yancey, that was just a drifter and had nothing going for him. And I think when Ray saw that he was interested in that sort of thing, I think he capitalized on it in order to lure him and maybe a few other people in. But they had found a site out near one of the places where they were searching earlier that had a lot of red and black candles sitting around, and it had names of Ray and all his friends, especially Dennis Roy Yancey, written all over the rocks around where that was, and that was evidently where they had a little ceremony of some type. And I think the woman, Marie, that Yancey was convicted of killing, I think she had maybe been taken there to that area to serve as a sacrificial victim, and that's why he strangled her while Ray was filming it.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is just so sick and warped. It's still amazing.
Yeah, he had a thing as well too that there was this major, of course, sexual component to this, because of torture and sadism is part of and then the abuse sexually with these monstrous things that he inserted into the women. This is the words of David Parker Ray on what captured women will do to be freed. Remember, women will do or say anything to get loose. They will scratch, offer money, yell, beg, scream, run, offer sex. Excuses and sob stories, menstruating, pregnant, VD, sick, kids with babysitter, a sick baby, a sick parent. She must be subjected to hypnosis before the woman can be safely released. Never trust a chained captive. Mm-hmm. So he had a whole list. He inserted a cassette and told the women to shut up and then listen, and warned them that maybe a little bit of whimpering was allowed, but any kind of uncontrollable crying, any type of attempt to escape would be. So it was just a horrifying sort of a manifesto. Here is the rules of the sex slavery and the torture and the Satanism that he said he was going to subject these women to. And like you say, he set up a monitor so they had to watch their own torture. Mm-hmm. And it was prolonged torture. And then now there was sort of different estimates on how many murders that occurred on this, and people were buried. Where do you think where were the people buried, and how many victims do you think accurately would be safe to say that David Parker Ray and his accomplices were responsible for killing?
Well, I think if you combine the ones that they may have killed with the ones that they also may have tortured and then let go, because they were given these hypnotic drugs, and several of them that worked for, they would just release. But I think it could reach up into the 40s, like it's been estimated. I have seen one estimate that said it might have run up as high as 60, but I think they're probably over 40. And in his journals, he had claimed over 40, and he also had a lot of information in there about good ideas that he'd had on ways to hide bodies, and one of them was to find a road that was under construction and being paved and bury the bodies before the pavement went down, bury them there on the roadway. And then another thing, when this guy found out about his concrete in the tires, he thought that was, just a definite thing that he probably was doing. And there was a former policeman from there, I think in Albuquerque, that had worked at a jail for a while, and Ray's girlfriend, Cynthia Hendy, had talked in the jail a lot that they had dumped bodies up in a place called the Pit at Caballo Lake, which is near that area. And she said that somebody had pictures of the pit, and you could see heads and legs and everything else floating in the water.
Wow.
So there's no telling. We'll never know for sure how many victims that he had, because some of them that are still living can't remember it, and there may be so many dead already. Now, there was a letter that when they were getting the jewelry lined up ready to photograph, they came across a letter that was out of an envelope, so there was no address or return address on it, and it was written to a girl named Connie, and it had been written from Australia by a guy named Mark that had evidently met this Connie when he came over for a vacation and then wrote her after he got back home. And the FBI, the agent Frank Fisher, who was instrumental in all of this renewed search and all the jewelry information, Frank Fisher went to Australia and gave all the details that they had gotten about this man from the letter, and went on Australian television news trying to locate him or somebody who knew him so they could find out maybe a last name for this Connie, because she was described just exactly in his journal as she was by what they had been able to find out from the letter. The height, the hair color, everything. It was just perfect description, and they were afraid she might be a victim that they just didn't know anything about. And another victim of his, Jim Yancey, was the prosecutor in his trial, and he had worked really hard on the case and then got the conviction. And his wife, Karen, was an investigator in the Attorney General's office there in Albuquerque. Is very well known, well respected, helpful to everybody, excellent investigator with a great reputation. And during the time of Ray's trial and then afterwards, they were really stressed at home, and she started going to the Indian casinos out there and gambling just for something to do, for recreation. And that pretty much overtook her life. She began going more and more often and being real secretive about it and not telling her friends what she was doing. And debts were piling up and credit cards were getting cut off, and she was about to get put on temporary relief from her job for a while. Her husband, Jim, told the press that she owed over $100,000 at the casinos. And so she went out and started robbing banks.
Wow.
She would take her work vehicle and put on a ball cap, some sunglasses, a disguise like that, and go and rob banks. And one day the police got there before she could leave the scene, and she managed to jump in that car and get down the road to a fast food restaurant, and in the parking lot they had a long standoff, and they didn't have a clue, at the time who they were dealing with. And she finally raised the gun and pointed at them, and they had no choice but to shoot. And when they ran the tag, it came back to the Attorney General's office, and then they checked ID and discovered who it was.
Incredible.
And she was shot and killed in May of 2003 because of the stress that David Parker Ray had brought onto her family. And there's another victim. Things like that just astounded me when I started finding all that. I was just amazed.
How much evidence is there that they let any woman go hypnotized or on amnesia-inducing drugs? Was there any evidence that this occurred?
Yes, there was definitely one. I think her name was Kelly Van Cleve, and they had videotapes of her being tortured, and she had a real distinctive tattoo on her leg, and they identified her from that. And she had no memories of it for a while, and then it started coming back to her, and she ended up being one of the people that he was convicted of kidnapping.
Okay.
But they ID'd her from a tattoo. She and Cynthia both have gone on to have, nice, normal, well-adjusted, happy lives, and I don't see how in the world they managed. They must have been really strong young women to have been able to overcome that. But I think they're both doing quite well now.
Yeah, it's some good news in these kinds of stories. That there isn't very much good news at all. Tell us now about this controversial movie based on the story of David Parker Ray.
Okay, the movie is going to be called The Toybox, and a man named Michael Colburn had read Slow Death and got interested in the story and started researching it and working up a film from that. And from all accounts, I think if it gets released, it's going to be okay. It's very low budget. They only spent about $20,000 on it, which for a movie, that's extreme low budget. But they had some pretty talented people working with them, and they had the gist of everything that had gone on. And it's had several release dates, and then they'd get pushed back, and it'd be in post-production or something of that nature. And the last release date that it's been pushed back to at this point that I know of is August 2013. And I'm figuring it's going to be one of these things that goes straight to video.
Sure.
But I believe that there's a lot of people that are still going to enjoy it quite a lot, because there's so many people that have followed this case for such a long time. But I think it's pretty well done from everything I've been able to gather. They filmed in Arizona and in Texas and several other places in the Southwest when they could find good locations. And some of the actors would also be people who had helped write, and some of the crew would help act, and they had a lot of overlapping duties there to get it made for that much money. But I'm really in hopes that it will get released.
Yes, absolutely. Now, you've been on the program before, 3 times actually. We had the pleasure of having you on. Blood Highway was the last time, Blood Ambush, and Blood Lust. And you have another book called Blood Betrayal, so a lot of blood going on.
Right. I was told by a very successful writer that if you wanted your book to get picked up off the shelf, you ought to always work blood into the title somewhere. So I've always tried to do that.
That's probably a good strategy for sure. And it's not like these books aren't, the titles aren't appropriate. They definitely are. That Blood Highway was the last one. That was a wild story, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Tell us what projects that you're interested in now, or you are considering that you're considering writing now, if any. Tell us about that.
Well, what I'm going to be doing next, I am going to be writing some e-book materials for the company. They want to move over into e-books and e-book shorts, and I'm going to be working on that probably in conjunction with William Phelps, who's another one of their writers. He's a very good researcher and he's a good interviewer, and I'm a good researcher and transcriber, and we're going to kind of throw in together on some projects, I think. And the first week of February, I have a film crew that's coming over to meet me in Rome, Georgia, from Investigation Discovery's program Behind Mansion Walls, and they're going to do a segment that's based on the case that I wrote about in Blood Ambush. And I'm very pleased about that, because I'm going to get an opportunity to say yet again that I do not believe Barbara Roberts was the killer in that case. I think she's spending her life in prison for something that she didn't do that part of the crime. She was a participant, but I don't think she fired those 3 fatal shots.
Right.
And the doctor, her boyfriend, has since committed suicide. He got off with a slap on the wrist and practically time served, and then he moved home to live with his mother, and not too long after that he hung himself in the closet. And I think that was a combination of guilt and the fact that he couldn't practice neurosurgery anymore. They had an automobile accident, and he was not able to hold his hands steady after then. So it's a mess. But no way of getting Barbara out that I can see, because she pretty much chose to put herself in that position. I'd like to see her out.
Yeah, she doesn't even have the opportunity of any more appeals, does she?
I don't think so. And her attorney for the trial, who was also my attorney for some civil things, unfortunately, got disbarred. So I think the fact of her having inadequate representation during the trial was pretty much self-evident by that. But I've spoken to her appeal attorney, and I don't think she's got too many more opportunities coming up. In some of the states, they can just go back and forth from state to federal for just interminable amounts of time. But I don't think here in Alabama they have that many shots.
Right. And so this will be interesting for you to shoot some film for an Investigation Discovery. Yeah,
it will be. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and then good for you for maintaining that this woman is innocent too. Because I mean that if there is anything going to happen, it's because people will stand up for them, and you never know what kind of momentum that will lead to. Investigation Discovery is, of course, millions of viewers, so all you can do is try, I guess.
I will certainly try loud and long as it takes me to ever get anybody to pay attention to that. I saw a letter in her attorney's files. He let me go through them and get what I wanted out for the book. And there was a letter in there that he had received from a shooting range over in Georgia where she and the doctor went to learn to shoot, supposedly. And they said in that letter, and they're a very reputable place, they wouldn't just lie about it for no reason, but they said in that letter that she, after her car accident, she had a lot of trouble with her arms and nerves in her arms and the muscles. They said she could not hold up a shotgun to shoot it, and she barely could hold up a pistol. And she's not going to run 100 yards across a field through high weeds carrying a shotgun and then meet up with her victim at the lake and then shoot the woman 3 times. The doctor was in the process of driving down there in the woman's car to the lake, and I think he got Barbara and took the shotgun and went on down there and did those last 3 shots. That's just my opinion. And the men that prosecuted her are all good, decent, honorable men, fine gentlemen that I've known all of them for years. And they would not have tried for the death penalty if they'd been given any choice. But I don't believe that they were, because she refused to testify. She wouldn't cooperate, and she was offered several deals and turned them down consistently. So it's like I said a while ago, she's put herself in that position, but that doesn't make it any the less disturbing for me to think about her living her life out in prison for something that I think she obviously didn't do.
Yeah. Well, at least you're an advocate for her innocence, and I mean, even if she didn't conduct herself too wisely, for the record, I guess that's all you can really ever do is just. And that's why these books are important. I mean, for the record, all the valuable and relevant, important information is there for the record. And with Slow Death, with this book that you've been asked to write a foreword for. This is another book that's gone on to have a life of its own. Like you say, it's been published in 2003. The story an arrest was around 1999. These crimes happened before that, before the turn of the century. And then there's still developments in 2011 after Jim Fielder dies, after he's planning an update. These stories just go on, and almost from David Parker Ray's Evil from the Grave, he is still casting mayhem and disaster, right from the FBI agent that committed suicide to the prosecutor that went on to rob banks. So it's an amazing evil legacy that this Slow Death has become.
Well, it's become a really unpleasant legacy for his daughter, Jessie, who tried her best, I think, to straighten out and went to live with her mother and her daughter in Kentucky. And everything was quiet for a little while, and then the people in this little small town there where they were living got wind of her being there and who she was, and they started looking up what she had done and finding out details about the story. And there was just this little internet war that went on for months between the people in that town, posting and answering and posting and answering. And some thought she was trying to live a good life, and others thought she was just hiding out there waiting to commit mayhem again. And I was really sad for her daughter. She has a teenage daughter, and the daughter went online finally after this had been going on for a long time and said that she felt really bad that people were persecuting her mother like that, and that she just hoped that her granddaddy had repented of the things that he had done before he died. And that's sad for a teenager to be dragged into a situation like that.
Sure. Well, she's an innocent person.
Totally.
Jessie Ray, to this day, claims her father is innocent, doesn't she?
Well, she does, but I think she knows better. She has to have known better because she was around too much for too long a time, and it was an off and on situation. She'd leave a while, and then he'd get sick and call her to come back home, and she has to have known what was going on. There's no earthly way that anybody could fail to see that. And I think she just wants to, she hopes that people will believe that, but I don't think she really expects that anybody will, because there's just too much proof of what was done. Now, she claims that she had no part in getting victims there, but there were quite a few other people that said she did have. So I don't know. I hope that the woman is really doing what her daughter and her defenders up there in Kentucky think that she's doing, and doing her best to have a good life now.
Was there any rhyme or reason why all these? I mean, you talked about that David Parker Ray sort of manipulated this Yancy guy in that with the Satanism and the power, I guess. Tell us a little bit about what you sort of got from the book itself, from why these other people would be involved.
Well, there's always people out there that are looking for something, and it's like Dennis Roy Yancey. He had absolutely nothing or nobody, and he showed up in Truth or Consequences, which, by the way, seems to be a really strange little town from everything I got from the book and the other information that I was able to find. And I think that people would just get involved because they had nothing else in their life. It's the only thing I can think of. I'm stumped as to why they would, but that's the only reason I can think of, is that their lives were just empty, and here was somebody that was real charismatic and seemed to have a lot of power and was paying attention to them and making them feel maybe important to be a means to the end for him. He probably he was using them, I think, to help tow victims up for a large part.
But if they're videotaping, and he videotaped with his girlfriend these assaults, and he videotaped some of this stuff, including at least one murder with Yancy,
mm-hmm.
Isn't it safe to say that these people enjoyed torture and killing and everything that was involved, that they must have enjoyed it, regardless of someone introducing them to it? You know what I'm saying? Like some people,
they would have to enjoy it in order to continue taking part.
Yeah.
And some of them probably lit a shuck pretty fast when they saw what was going on, to keep from becoming victims themselves if they didn't want to be part of it.
Right.
So I think that I know that they must have enjoyed what they were doing. Now, he made the statement that he could not get any kind of enjoyment out of sex unless there was pain involved for the victim.
Right.
They said there had to be pain involved, and then he would brag to the victims about how his girlfriend there would be so much rougher on him than he was going to be, because that was just the way she was. So,
yeah,
I don't know. The whole thing it's an amazing story, and it just keeps developing. I'm not at all going to be surprised if another 5 years from now there's still information cropping up about some of the missing persons, and some of the victims might remember more at some point, and those leg bones finally may be identified. They can, if they can get DNA out of a mammoth, surely to goodness they can get DNA out of the leg bones.
Yeah, I would think, possibly.
And I think that's, a human leg bone, a set of leg bones, is not going to get into a lake unless a dead person has been in there, And they've got to ID those leg bones if there's any way. They might belong to Jill Troyer that they got the credible tips about. They might belong to any number of the other victims. They got to keep trying, and I think they will.
This is what David Parker Ray had some instructions for the sex slave that they had captured. This is a tape that started with religious instrumental music and Ray's soft voice. Hello, bitch. I'm sure you're wondering why you've been kidnapped and what's going to happen to you. That's why this tape has been made. It saves a lot of talking. It's brief, blunt, and to the point. I'm a dungeon master for a local chapter of the Church of Satan, Lucifer, or the devil to you. You have been abducted so that your body can be used during rituals and for sexual purposes for the congregation after the meetings. Our membership is pretty small, but all about 20 people, mixed male and female. Our meetings are pretty much what most people imagine, the way it is depicted in the movies. A hidden church, black robes, pentagrams, rituals, chanting, a lot of nakedness, animal sacrifices, chicken blood, and a hell of a lot of sex afterward. The meetings get interesting and exciting, to say the least. Trying to raise the demons is important, but it is the sex that keeps the church financially afloat. The high priest lives to keep everybody fired up on sex, and for that we like fresh meat. Every couple of months we kidnap some good-looking little bitch to use during the rituals and to be kept available for everyone to use during the orgy. And so he goes on like that. So part of it is the terrifying his subject as well and telling them what will happen if they don't listen to every single detail in order.
I don't believe that he ever had as many as 20 people. I think that was, and I don't think he conducted rituals that much either. I think he was, just more or less making that up as he went. But those tapes just go on and on and on. they're so lengthy and detailed and horrifying, and they're all transcribed in the book, and it's just mind-blowing to read and imagine what those women must have felt like having to listen to something like that and them all trussed up in a torture chamber at the time.
Yeah, and as we spoke earlier before the interview tonight, this seemed to really affect Jim Fielder, too. He never went on to write any more books. And this one, it just from my personal conversations with him, it seemed to play heavy on him, having gone through this thing. And that's, I think, imaginable, too, when you brush near or get so close to something so evil that it is hard not to just brush yourself off and continue. And it must have been a big effect, a heavy effect on him.
Well, now, if your listeners would like to see him and hear more details about this story and see some actual footage of the people that were involved, there are a bunch of videos posted on YouTube. Some that Mr. Fielder had made parts of, and some that featured the victims, that escaped, talking about it. That might be something that people might want to check out.
Absolutely. So they'd just be able to go and sort of type in slow death and Jim Fielder, and they would be able to find some things, right? Yeah.
Or David Parker Ray.
Or David Parker Ray.
I think that's how I searched, and there's lots and lots of videos on there from that time of him.
Yeah, I've seen
all the other people.
I've seen some things too. It's amazing. The thing is that always it disturbs me more than just the single act of some of these heinous monsters that we discuss on this program, that you've written about, that I've written about, and other people have written about, all the authors have written about, is the phenomena of the accomplice, the daughter, the girlfriend, and the friend. Especially doing something like this, because this is not murder for robbery or murder clean and simple, or this is some of the the worst types of crime, a murder imaginable, and yet the three accomplices, including your daughter, girlfriend, and friend. It's, to me, that's the most horrifying part of this, is the accomplice. Other people in the same evil mindset.
Right. Well, it horrifies me that those people could be so dependent on being made to feel important by somebody that they could find themselves sucked into a situation like that. I think that's a large part of it. Either they want their love or their approval or their friendship, or they just want the thrill of feeling important.
Yeah, and I think what we didn't really discuss tonight too but it's really captured in the book is the charismatic appeal of David Parker Ray. You're right. There's this manipulation here as well. It's not
like
just
Charles Manson. It's that same power to get your followers to do what you say. It's very similar.
Yeah.
Charismatic appeal.
And the thing is, with a daughter, I mean, what kind of life did this young woman? What kind of chance did she stand with this type of father and these type of activities going on, and a girlfriend 20 years or more his junior, and so the influence that the daughter had, she didn't have much of a chance to turn out normal at all.
No, she certainly didn't. It's a miracle that she seems to have at least partway pulled her life together a little bit now. So. Yeah,
like you say, it's pretty hard to hide. It's pretty hard to hide from this kind of horror, because eventually people find out. It's going to be following her around for the rest of her life unless she moved from the United States, basically. But as long as she's in America, somebody will find her eventually.
Well, that's right. I guess in a very, very small Kentucky town, she thought she was maybe going to get to lay low for a little while, but it didn't work out that way.
Yes, so that's incredible. Well, Sheila, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank you very much for coming on to the program once again and talking about the Slow Death by Jim Fielder, now a true crime classic by Kensington Press, Pinnacle, and you are a Pinnacle author as well. And you were asked, and you thought it a privilege to write an update and a foreword for Slow Death by Jim Fielder. And so I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking about that. And please get a hold of me as soon as you have another project in the works, and we'll get you back on and talk about another fine book that you've written.
Well, I certainly will. I appreciate it. And everybody, if you haven't read this book, read it. If you have read it, get it and read the update, because it's an important book, I think, in true crime, one of the most.
Absolutely. And to remind our audience, too, about your appearance on Investigation Discovery. What program is that again?
It's going to be on Behind Mansion Walls. I'm not sure when it will air, probably a while in the future, because they're just getting to the point of working on it now. But it's going to be Behind Mansion Walls.
And that's going to be out in February, right?
I think so.
Or you're filming in February?
I'm filming in February. I'm not sure when the work's going to get done on it, but it should be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with it.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that, because there's just people that are just addicted to that program, like myself.
Well, I'll be sure to let you know when it's going to be on.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Sheila. You have a great night, and thank you very much for coming back onto the program.
Well, thank you. I always appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Sheila. Bye-bye.